Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome to Leap of Faith, the program where we speak with people about their spiritual journeys so we can gain insight and inspiration on our own spiritual journey. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. You know, there's a philosophical point of view that says that everything negative in our lives serves the purpose of helping us to appreciate the good things. For example, if we didn't experience darkness, we could not fully appreciate light. Being in pain helps us appreciate feeling healthy. As a person who has experienced many painful health issues in my life, I can tell you that I appreciate painless days way more than I would if I had never experienced that pain in the first place. Gratitude is an extremely important part of the human experience. Beginning our day by taking time to express gratitude for everything in our lives helps us put things in perspective, but it also helps us to gain more good in our lives. Mishlei, Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7, says that as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. What we concentrate on, we become. And it's for this reason that the Jewish prayer book, the Siddur, begins with a prayer of gratitude to God for the gift of another day of life. Every Orthodox Jew begins their day saying this prayer called the Moda'ani prayer. As soon as we open our eyes and become conscious of our existence in the world one more day, we recite this prayer. And in fact, instead of the first sentence beginning with, I am grateful, it begins with grateful am I. And this awkward construction serves as a reinforcement of the importance of focusing not on me, but on all the things I have to be grateful for, including the gift of another day. Those who believe in God must believe that if we've been given another day, we still have work to do in this world. The world needs us, me and you, and our unique contribution. And we've been given another opportunity to contribute to it and to do what it was we were created to do in this world. What an amazing gift. On today's Leap of Faith, I will be speaking with Barak Moore. Barak grew up in a poverty-stricken and violent part of New York, but considers his upbringing as a gift. So when we come back, we'll hear from Barak as he shares his journey from a non-religious and violent life to a life of Torah and transformation. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. Joining me is my guest, Barak Moore, who's had a fascinating journey to Judaism from church in New York's worst neighborhood and swimming on an all-black swim team through Princeton University to where he is now with 8 children living in Neve Daniel, which is in the Judea area of Israel. Welcome, Barak, to Leap of Faith.
Thank you so much, Penina, for having me. I'm constantly stunned that anybody finds my life interesting.
I'm sure that it's going to be absolutely inspirational. You know, it's really interesting how much we can learn from other people's journeys and from their stories. So I'm always excited to have another story to share with my audience. So Barak, I always like to start our conversations at the beginning. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you grew up?
Sure. So I was born the son of an intermarriage where, let's start with my grandfather, came from a shtetl in Eastern Europe, moved to the Lower East Side, and then his daughter went to Queens College and married a non-Jew, whereupon my grandfather sat Shiva and proceeded to treat her and us as if were dead, meaning we would go, the only Jewish thing really we did growing up was to go to a Pesach Seder at his house, which is maybe 10 minutes from our house. But every Seder, he would go upstairs until we would all leave and just miss the Seder every single year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was baptized as Douglas Brendan Moore in a place called East New York, which is by far the worst neighborhood in New York City. And just looking back, was very, very like I witnessed death in multiple forms firsthand. It was a very, very difficult childhood. Race riots. My father was driving through Harlem one day and he hit a drug addict who was crossing the street full speed, trying to make a light, where we were almost lynched. I have stories you would not believe.
Wow.
But in terms of as I tell my story, so it's amazingly healing for me, and I kind of figured out what my life is about, and I think that's kind of what you're trying to accomplish. But if I had to put it in one tagline, so my rabbi once was the teacher for Kirk Douglas, and he said, his name is Rabbi Aaron, and he said that Kirk Douglas once told him once, "I gave my children every gift except one, and that gift was the gift of poverty, which I couldn't give them. And fortunately, I have the gift of poverty. I was given that gift, and I'd love to share it without anybody having to go and live through the misery that I lived through in East New York."
Okay. So you grew up in this poverty-stricken, kind of violent environment without any Judaism, but you were raised in a religious Christian home.
Not fanatically religious. I went to church every week. And until I was 8 years old, when we went on vacation, we had this very, very strange vacation spot on the Mason-Dixon line where some amazing Christian family just figured they would take in a family of 8 every single summer.
Wow.
But when we went there, we went to Vacation Bibles. I grew up in I have pictures from my childhood of being in parades with Jesus's whatever is awesome Lord, something like that. So I grew up in a fairly Christian environment, even though I did have a brit when I was growing up, and also we did attend a Pesach Seder every year. But what's interesting is that my journey was a little bit like the journey of my family over the years, and particularly my mother. Over the years, it wasn't just a solo thing. It was kind of particularly in my mother, kind of after her father sat Shiva for her, which was obviously a pretty serious event, she ended up kind of coming back to her roots, and even later on in life, taking her first name, which was a Yiddish name from her childhood, and then her last name that she grew up with. And there was kind of this closing of the circle, and I ended up meeting my grandfather when I was 8 years old. His greatest gift, his greatest desire in life is that his grandchildren should move to Israel. I did that. I now have 8 children here in Israel. And there's a real closing of the circle. It's a real, quite an extraordinary change, not just for me, but for the whole kind of generations.
So how did you get to that point? What happened between here and there, as far as, like you said, you were 8 years old and something began to change in your family dynamics?
Yeah, so generally the changes that happened in my growing up were my father got into a big fight with somebody. So in this particular case, I grew up, my father pretty much never had a job. We had 6 children living in the family. And so one day he got into a big fight with the pastor, stormed out of the church. And that was around the time when my oldest brother, started becoming interested in the teachings of Rabbi Meir Kahana, who it should be said was probably one of the only Jewish leaders that had any interest in what we call the left behind Jews in places like East New York and Brownsville and Bushwick and all these awful places that wealthier Jews were able to flee from and escape, but they were left behind Jews. So he was interested in the teachings of Rabbi Meir Kahana. He decided he wanted to have a bar mitzvah, and boom, we all went to the a conservative shul in the area.
Now, when you started going to this conservative shul, though, the family still believed in Jesus, right?
I'm not so sure we had that many beliefs.
Okay.
we were kind of went with the flow, I guess. It wasn't that big of a change. I was 8 years old. I certainly don't recall believing in anything in particular. So we all basically graduated from bar mitzvah lessons and had our bar mitzvahs, and we're finished with Judaism. And I was finished with Judaism until I ended up going to Princeton University in my third year. How did I get to Princeton University is an interesting story. I ended up meeting probably the greatest teacher of our generation, a man named John Katzman, who was the founder of a massive educational company called the Princeton Review. And I just so happened was his first student ever. I ended up making a deal with him that he'd give me the course for free. In fact, he tutored me privately in exchange for me getting him some other students. And I got him some other students. I ended up getting him 200 students from my high school, Stuyvesant High School. And I started working for him. He turned my life around, got me into Princeton. I started teaching for him when I was 16. And what happened was that in my third year at Princeton, I ended up going to a lecture by a man named Yoram Chazoni, who's quite well known as a philosopher now, but back in those days, he was a student activist at Princeton. And for some reason, I ended up at this talk called Why You Should Make Aliyah. And it wasn't even at a Jewish event. It was at the Debating Society. I don't know how I got to go to this thing, but at the end, he said, and if you don't make Aliyah, move to Israel, you should at least go to Israel for a year. And I thought, that makes sense. So I ended up going to Israel, and I got myself into a dorm room with 5 secular Israelis and 2 Arab Israelis. And in that dorm room, I became religious. One of my secular Israelis saw that I was interested in archaeology, and he said, if you're interested in archaeology, the thing to do is to read the Bible. That's where all the archaeology comes from. That's the source of everything. I started reading the Bible, and I got to Leviticus, and I saw something there in the midst of probably the most unlikely place for anybody ever to do tshuva, to return to Judaism, was the curses that are going to befall the Jewish people if they don't follow the mitzvot. And so it says in the midst of all these curses, it says at the end, and afterwards, I'm going to bring you back to Israel. And I actually went to some of the people on my overseas program at Tel Aviv University. I said, "Did you see this?" And the first person I said that to is now living in Muncie as a religious father with 4 kids, and apparently it's not well known. But basically the course of Jewish history is reasonably predicted in Vayikra, in Leviticus.
Right. Okay, you said that there was an interesting story behind how you got to Princeton. You want to share that with us?
Sure. So I, along with my 5 brothers and sisters, were extremely involved in swimming. We were on an all-black swim team in a place called Bushwick. Bushwick, just to level set for your listeners, is reasonably famous from an Eddie Murphy skit where he says, "I'm a black man and I would not go to Bushwick." So Bushwick is relatively famous for being a terrible neighborhood, but far less bad than East New York. But I was on an all-black swim team there. It was extremely violent. The kind of stuff that was going on there, they would put a smelly bucket over a kid's head when he did something wrong as a punishment, and he'd have to keep his arms and legs up in the air for a half hour at a time, and they would call this punishment dying cockroach. It was
wow.
It was quite an amazing thing. They when kids would have problems with each other, they would have an arranged fight between the 2 of them in the pool. And this could be girls, bathing suits, you could imagine. It's pretty nasty, violent stuff that was going on there. But anyway, we progressed in swimming. My father was kind of maniacal about swimming. My brother became the #1 swimmer in the country. My name is listed in the International Swimming Hall of Fame. I was pretty successful myself. And at the age of 15, I started at Princeton based on swimming and based on getting my SAT scores to be pretty sky high, based on this amazing turn of my life where I met John Katzman. He helped get me into Princeton. I ended up teaching for him, and basically I've spent the last 30 years trying to be him, where sort of the same way that he turned my life around in a few sessions, I try to do the same thing now for other people as well. That's my life's mission. I have such a sense for people suffering and what kids suffering that I try to stop suffering wherever I can see it, and I do it one child at a time.
Wow, that's a pretty amazing accomplishment to be able to graduate with such scores and so early, coming from a poverty-stricken school. And just that in and of itself is amazing. Well, Barak, I have to stop you right now because
Sure.
we are at the end of this segment. We have to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll continue our fascinating conversation with my guest, Barak Moore. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things, but at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to the second segment of Leap of Faith. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and today I am speaking with Barak Moore, who from the pain of his childhood, he has a personal mission of ending suffering one student at a time. Now, Barak, before the break, you were telling us about how you grew up in this kind of poverty-stricken area of New York, and you said that life was kind of difficult, and you have some stories to share with us about that, right?
Well, we had this very scary German Shepherd Guard dog that was stolen. That's how bad this neighborhood was.
Wow, okay.
We had, my father grew marijuana, and one day we heard a story where there were 3 people running down the street with these 10-foot tall marijuana plants. We'd been robbed of the marijuana crop. I was the first one on the scene, for example, at East New York train station. Somebody had been shot in the neck right in front of me. I was the first one there, and he died right in front of me. We had someone who put a shotgun in his mouth inside of our house.
Oh my!
And the children had to clean up the brains from the ceiling and the wall.
Wow!
This was a tough environment to go through. I had to rescue my brother from a race riot. He was in there was time in junior high school when I heard it was mostly a black school, and some of the black kids were kind of yelling excitedly. So I get outside, and there are a sea of blacks, and right in the middle is my brother being assaulted by a much older kind of juvenile delinquent from another high school. We were in junior high school at the time. So I go back into the school, and I grab the security guard, and the security guard is this very muscular guy. He goes and just kind of slices through this sea of people, grabs my brother and extricates him from it. Turns out that the security guard was the brother of this juvenile delinquent that was assaulting and mugging my brother at the time. But there were a number of race riots, lots of racist attacks. It was not a very fun childhood to grow up in.
How were you able to accomplish so much in the midst of such chaos?
I work with lots of different kinds of students, lots of different ages. But one of the things I find when I work with profoundly learning disabled people or people with any kind of handicap is they often end up compensating. So somebody who can't read will compensate by having tremendous connecting skills and emotional intelligence. So I compensated for this from this miserable childhood by sort of retreating to a world of the intellect, and I was also very, very involved in swimming at the very highest level. So I got into high school, New York's best high school, Stuyvesant High School, when I was 11 years old. I got into Princeton when I was 15, and sort of like Venus Williams once said that she grew up with this miserable tennis childhood where her father was always forcing her to play tennis, and it was miserable and it was traumatic. But then one day she discovered that she was really great at tennis, and she started to love it. And sort of the same thing happened with me. I grew up in an environment where swimming meant having to swim underwater for sometimes 2-3 laps and getting beaten if you didn't accomplish the task of staying underwater. Was really frightening stuff. The getting beaten was a regular feature of the childhood that I grew up in.
Well, the world has changed a lot, at least in some areas, as far as what's acceptable nowadays in raising children.
In East New York, it's pretty much the same. Don't fool yourself.
Right.
I don't recall in my childhood ever seeing a parent reacting, just speaking neutrally to a child.
Wow.
There was traveling on the A train, the J train. It's leave alone and zap. There's screaming as you go from house to house, just walking along the street. And this is sort of the message that I like to give when I give these talks, is that ironically, you would think that this is a terrible childhood to have grown up in. I must be this horribly dysfunctional person. Actually, it's quite the opposite, where I have this gift of poverty. I remember when I landed at Princeton for the first time, I went to the cafeteria, and I was thinking, this is the greatest sight these eyes have ever seen. We had 8 huge buckets of ice cream, different flavors in the cafeteria, and I could not believe what I was seeing. I used to get there at 5:30 in the afternoon when they would open and stay till 7:30 just so I could spend 2 hours eating in the cafeteria, and people were so miserable there about what there was. Growing up in East New York, growing up in this kind of dysfunctional poverty makes everything just a shock that how wonderful life is.
Right. That is very true. You know, they say that we wouldn't understand what light is if we didn't also experience darkness. All right. So you got yourself to Princeton at a very young age. What was it like being now Princeton's an Ivy League college.
Yes, it is.
So what was it like being 15, 16 years old attending an Ivy League college? That must have been quite an amazing experience.
So people are often asking me, how is that? How'd you feel? I just felt normal. I thought that was kind of a normal thing. I'd always been much younger than everybody around me. In junior high school, it was very bad because people would kind of prowl the halls, and with a ski mask, one would put a ski mask over your head, the other one would use your face as a speed bag for boxing practice. So it was a lot better than junior high school or elementary school or high school. It was this world. It was just like this paradise. The luxury, the beauty, the wealth, the food was overwhelming. When I got to Israel, because I took a year off from between my 3rd and 4th years at Princeton, I wanted to get everything I could out of this amazing experience. I'd never been overseas. And other kids, I felt they were kind of spoiled, and they wanted to party, and I wanted to learn, I wanted to experience, I wanted to room with Israelis, I wanted to learn the language. And as a result, I have always felt like so much around me is an incredible opportunity. Everything is wonderful. I could sit in coach on an airplane and be the happiest person there.
Wow. So tell us about your year in Israel, because that was kind of the catalyst for you to choose to become religious.
As I mentioned, I became religious in my dorm room on my own, surrounded by secular and Arab roommates. I had no idea what the traditional path was in terms of community, families, synagogue, that kind of a thing. For me, it was just, I had a stack of books on Shabbat, and I loved it. I thought this was the greatest thing. When I came to Israel for the first time, I felt something. And that's a tremendous blessing that I've had in my life. I felt something was different here. And I've been here for many, many years. That feeling that there's something special when you are here has just never gone away. And I think that I was very fortunate that I felt it and then I reacted to it. I explored what was going on. I read the Bible. I went to where I had borrowed the Bible from the overseas program at Tel Aviv University. There was a religious woman there, And I don't think anybody had ever asked her for any religious resource in her entire career at the overseas program at Tel Aviv University. So she said to me, I noticed you borrowed the Bible. We have these tapes here that nobody's ever listened to. And would you be interested in listening to these tapes? And it turns out it was Dennis Prager talking about various features of Judaism, one of which was Shabbat. That was the first one I listened to. He said, I could explain to you what Shabbat is, but it's a really experiential thing. So really the only way to understand Shabbat is to observe it. So I did in my dorm room alone. And I loved it.
How did you know what to do? Or did you just do what just made sense to you?
Oh, it was ridiculous at the start. I went to the beach with one of my secular roommates, and I was wearing a kippah. And he said, "Look, people don't wear a kippah at the beach on Shabbat." Right after the overseas program at Tel Aviv University, I went to Asian Torah for a few weeks, and I asked them. I said, "I want to learn religion." And I learned a few things there, and I learned that there was something called the 3 weeks. And on my way back from Israel to the United States, we had a stopover ticket, so I was able to stop over in Norway, where my girlfriend at the time, her family lived. And we ended up getting engaged on a fjord. It was very nice, but I didn't know that during the 3 weeks, you're allowed to take a shower.
You thought you weren't allowed to take a shower during the 3 weeks. Right,
so for 3 weeks, I didn't take a shower. Let's
just stop for a second and explain to our listeners the 3 weeks leading up to the date on the Jewish calendar, which is the 9th of Av, or is called Tisha B'Av, which is the most solemn date on the Jewish calendar because a tremendous number of tragedies have befallen the Jewish people on that date, including the destruction of both the first and the second temples. So it's a fast day for us. Unlike Yom Kippur, which people think is a sad day, and it isn't. It's actually a very joyful day. Tisha B'Av is literally the saddest day of the year. And so leading up to that holiday, we observe basically a time of partial mourning where we don't do certain things during those 3 weeks, including no weddings, including no outdoor public musical events and things like that. And then the last 9 days from the 1st of Av to the 9th of Av, we take on even more strictures, including not washing laundry and not showering, except there are some exceptions. But you thought that you weren't allowed to shower for 3 weeks. Wow, you must have really smelled nice.
And I got engaged during that time. So.
Okay, so what did you think? Did you have anything in your mind about being engaged to a non-Jewish girl as you were beginning to start becoming observant?
First of all, she was my student at the Princeton Review. I was running the Princeton Review from a time when I was about 19. I became the head, literally, of the entire New Jersey country. So she was 16. I was actually 18 when I was her teacher. And it took her 3 years to convert to Judaism because she admitted she had a boyfriend, and they were very suspicious that she wasn't in it.
Okay. Well, Barak, it's a good place to stop you for now. We're at the end of this segment. When we come back, we'll hear more from our guest, Barak Moore. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on The Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to the last segment of today's Leap of Faith. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and today I'm speaking with Barak Moore, who, from the pain of his childhood, has a mission, a personal mission, to end the suffering of students, one student at a time. Now, before the break, Barak was telling us about how he was beginning to become religious by going to Aish HaTorah, which is an outreach organization in Jerusalem. All right, Barak, so what happened then?
Okay, so in terms of becoming religious, I basically became religious at Princeton University. When I got back there, somebody taught me how to daven, somebody taught me what a page of Gemara was, the Talmud, and I learned very quickly. Fortunately, there's plenty of books. I was a voracious reader, so I ended up becoming religious fairly normatively. As soon as I graduated from college, I made Aliyah, moved to Israel, where I've been for the last 30 years, very much on and off. I actually believe I've set a record for making Aliyah because I've done it 3 times.
Oh, wow.
I had 2 very long stints being back in the United States after having made Aliyah, but I am finally here. I've been here for the last 7 years, and I even just for energy purposes, there's just no way I could go back to America. We're here forever.
Okay, so I happen to be friends with your wife, Rachel. How did you and Rachel meet?
So I was actually what's called an agun in my first marriage, where my wife was not agreeing to give me a divorce. We hear a lot about women who are agunot, but we don't hear much about men who are in chained marriages because both sides have to agree to a divorce. When I finally did get my divorce, my first shidduch date was with my current wife.
Oh, wow.
It took one date. It turns out I had a radio show. I told you that Dennis Prager was very influential in bringing me back to Judaism just through his cassette tapes. I contacted him, created a radio show with him. He has millions of listeners he's syndicated all across the United States, but he had this very tiny little radio show here in Israel. My first guest ever on that show was the rabbi who made a shidduch between me and my first wife. So it's very strange how life works. Sometimes you have to wait a long time, and sometimes things just happen instantly.
Right. Okay. So you met Rachel and you fell in love after just one date, and then the two of you got married and you ended up going back to the States.
Yes. A huge sacrifice on the part of my wife, for which I am tremendously grateful.
And then you finally were able to come back to Israel.
Yes, we did. And during that time, I was 12 years in the United States. I did not say a single word to my children in the language of English. So I spoke to them only in Hebrew. And my Hebrew was not all that terrific. But when they finally arrived, we knew we were coming back. And when they finally arrived, they saw, oh my gosh, people look like us, they dress like us, they act like us, and they speak the language, this strange language that we grew up with. So it actually worked out all quite well after only a 12-year journey there.
Yeah, that is really fantastic to speak the language the secondary language, to speak it in the home means that when they got here, they didn't have to struggle. That's fantastic.
Well, they did struggle, but it was extremely important in terms of their identity, how they perceive themselves. This is home for us. They finally arrived home, and it was a tremendous benefit for them.
Right. Fantastic. Okay, so Barak, what are you doing now here in Israel?
The way I see it is my life was so dramatically changed in an instant when I met the founder of the Princeton Review. His name is John Katzman. He changed my life literally in about 5 sessions of tutoring and raised my score on the SAT tremendously. And I ended up getting into Princeton University partly because of my interaction with him. I started teaching for him when I was 16 years old and ended up rising in the company and running his company. But I ran a few companies in my life, mostly in the high-tech space. But I decided about 4 years ago that I would go back to my roots and just come out of the closet and as a teacher.
Okay.
And what I've come to discover is that I have this intense desire to eliminate suffering from people's lives. I grew up with so much suffering, and I have such a desire to change it that I just try to be John Katzman and change somebody's life. I can get somebody to go from pure hatred of math to pure love of math in a single session. I can raise people's SAT scores by up to 600 points, 400 points just on a particular section. And the spin-off benefit is often, I'll take somebody who's clinically depressed, and they will start, one mother told me that her daughter is brushing her hair and putting on jewelry for the first time, and that's from teaching English. And people are really suffering. People are going through tremendous amount. I have an 18-year-old student who can't add 2 + 2 or read the word cat. And I can change his life in just a couple of sessions. And people have these transformations that's extremely similar to the kind of transformation that I went through. I have this advantage to knowing that it can be done, but that knowing it can be done and having the techniques that I learned directly from John Katzman, every student in my day experiences a massive transformation in every hour that we spend together. And it's a mission that I'm on to help people, to get them out of failing situations. There's so many resources these days that we can take advantage of that are on the internet, that there's no reason why every child isn't a master of reading in 2 languages, why they're not beautifully fluent in math, that they should love it, that they should love school, that they should love learning, they should be curious. And a child's life is so full of learning. That's their job, that's their world, that's what they're trying to do, that they should succeed beautifully there. And when they do, it transforms their life, it transforms their attitude. They stop acting out in all kinds of negative ways. And it's an amazing thing to see. Through the pain that I've suffered and through the darkness that I've experienced, I now go back to that place. I deal with people who are suffering, who are in pain, and I end it often in an hour or 2.
Wow, that is amazing. Would you say that it is more about acquiring some skills, or it's more about learning that when a person realizes that they are valuable and they can accomplish something, they get a sense of significance and meaning in their life, which turns around everything else?
So for me, it's all about the transformation, but I do it with the pretext of the academics. When a child when things aren't working, they just keep going back and back and back to school, and they're depressed and they're in pain and they're suffering and they're acting out and they're experiencing all kinds of collateral damage because of it. But they internalize and they say, I'm broken. There's something not right with me.
Right.
When you can turn that around, and often you can turn around their feeling, their attitude in a single session. Because once they see I can learn, it's not me, it's the environment I'm in, it's the teacher that I unfortunately have. If they see with their own eyes, I can learn this, I can get this incredible score on my test, they see, oh my gosh, I'm a very fine swan indeed. And everything changes, because the soul knows that your job in life is to improve, to make progress, to learn, to grow. And when that's not happening, as an adult, if you're in a place where that's not happening, you say, I have the wrong boss, I'm in the wrong place, I went to the wrong lecture. But a child says, I'm broken. And if you can turn that around, and you often can in a matter of a half hour or even an hour, if you can do that, the child all of a sudden has this like ebullience, this incredible swell of emotion that says, oh my gosh, it's like putting on glasses for the first time. Right. I remember putting on glasses in East New York when I was about 12 years old. I had terribly nearsighted. And there's garbage and broken glass everywhere. I had the most incredible well of emotion. Oh my gosh, I can see. But that's what children are like when they see, oh my gosh, I can learn. I'm not broken. We have the technology, the skills, the tools that 100% of students can succeed wildly and love it. And there's absolutely no excuse for any child to be suffering, any child that isn't loving their life, loving learning, succeeding wildly at it, and curious and enthusiastic about the world. There's just no excuse for that whatsoever. We can have 100% with every single child, and we don't, unfortunately.
Wow, Barak. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We're just about out of time for today's program, and you've told us so much about what you do. I'm sure that there are listeners out there who are thinking, I need this guy's help. So if somebody would like to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So the best way is just through Facebook or LinkedIn. Just type my name in if you can handle the strange name. It's Barak, B-A-R-A-K, and Moore, M-O-O-R-E. And you'll get to me.
Okay, fantastic. What about email? Do you have an email address they can reach you at?
Barak Moore, B-A-R-A-K, M-O-O-R-E, @gmail.com. And I'd love for people to reach out to me, even just for a consultation. If I can steer anybody in the right direction, if I can help anybody, that's what I'm here to do.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Barak. You've been listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and I'd love to hear from you as well. If you'd like to be in touch with me, you can email me at penina@israelnewstalkradio.com. That's Penina @israelnewstalkradio.com. And before I sign off, I just want to share with my listeners that I'm currently working on 2 speaking tours in the U.S. this fall, one for the month of Elul, which is September this year, and the other in early December. We're still in the planning stages for both trips, and the dates are still open. So if you would like to have me come out to your community to talk about my own Leap of Faith story, please be in touch at events@peninataylor.com or find me on my public Facebook page or my website, peninataylor.com. I'm really looking forward to meeting some of you in person. Thanks again for being here with me today. I'll see you next time when we take a leap of faith together here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.